The dish towel was folded differently. That's all it was. Not the kind of thing you'd expect to shatter a man's sense of order, but there it sat, draped over the oven handle, folded twice lengthwise instead of once, then crooked at the corners, just slightly. As if someone unfamiliar with the habit had tried to mimic it from memory. She never folded it like that. No one did. I stared at it longer than I should have, hands still holding the grocery bag. Keys hanging loose between my fingers. My eyes tracked it the way you follow a stranger who seems familiar but whose face remains unplaceable. Something so minor it should have meant nothing. And yet I didn't move. I'd been gone less than 40 minutes, quick trip to the local butcher because the kids wanted steak and she'd said she forgot to defrost it. I even joked as I left, something stupid about being the meat man, and she laughed, distracted, brushing my arm as I passed. That was 40 minutes ago. Now the towel looked like a lie. The air moved. There was a faint shift in the house's scent, not enough to name, but enough to note. Not hers. Not mine. Not anyone I'd expect. A sterile hint of something like cologne mixed with citrus, barely lingering. Like a hotel hallway. The hallway of a life I hadn't realized was hollowing itself out. The faucet was damp. I hadn't used it. She wasn't in the kitchen anymore. Distant sound came from upstairs, something soft and rhythmic. Not music. Footsteps, maybe. She didn't call down to greet me. I didn't ask why. I put the groceries down and walked toward the living room. The couch pillow was upside down. Not tossed. Not accidentally flipped. Just wrong. She has this compulsive thing, always tucks the tag under. Can't stand it showing. She says it reminds her of unfinished things. Now the tag stared at me, plain as guilt. I stood there, hands by my side, like a man watching smoke rise from under a door but hearing no alarm. On the coffee table sat her phone. That alone was strange, she never left it behind. It was always practically attached to her. Instagram updates, mom group messages, fitness tracker notifications, constant, obsessive checking. But there it was, face down, like she didn't want it seen. Like she'd needed to put it away. Like it didn't belong in the moment she'd just had. I didn't touch it. Didn't need to. A single drop of water sat on its back cover. Bead-like. As if it had just been wiped clean with damp fingers. The floorboards creaked upstairs. One creak, then silence. Not the kids. They were still at soccer. Just her. Or whoever had moved inside this house in the span of 40 minutes. I looked up instinctively, though I didn't want to. The ceiling felt thin. Like everything above was staged. I turned back to the kitchen, slower now. The towel. That's where it had started. I walked to the oven and touched it, pressing my thumb to the terry cloth like it might tell me something. It was warm. Not from heat. From use. Freshly handled. Then I noticed the second glass in the sink. Wet. No lipstick stain. No ice. Rinsed hastily. The edges still glistened. It hadn't been there when I left. We hadn't used two that morning. She never drank alone in the middle of the day. And the coaster, one of the slate ones we got for our anniversary, was at the far end of the counter, away from her usual stool. A crescent of condensation marked its center. A barely there vibration made the phone jump on the table behind me. Message received. I didn't turn. The sound said enough. I imagined a name lighting up that didn't belong. A message typed by someone whose fingerprints were probably still drying on that glass. I didn't say her name. Didn't call upstairs. Didn't move for a long while. Instead, I exhaled once, slowly. I adjusted the towel, folded it the way it should be. The right way. The way it had always been. I made it perfect again, precise, measured. Then I picked up the grocery bag and began putting things away, quietly, methodically, with the kind of care you use when you're performing a task that suddenly feels sacred in its routine, because everything else has shifted. The refrigerator door clicked shut with its usual finality. A drawer closed. The knife slid back into its wooden slot. Upstairs, she moved again. A footstep, a soft thud. Maybe a door closing. Maybe not. I didn't go up. Didn't ask. I had all the answers I needed, handed to me in the folds of a towel, the placement of a glass, the shape of silence. And I knew in that moment that she didn't realize she'd already been caught. The first time she forgot our anniversary, I let it slide. She was knee-deep in some online certification course, personal development, she called it. So busy trying to expand herself that I figured the date must have slipped her mind. She gave me a distracted kiss that morning, halfway out the door, muttering something about growth doesn't wait. Later, she texted me a heart emoji. Just that. No, I love you. No, can't wait to celebrate. Just a red symbol dropped into silence like a digital shrug. I told myself she was tired. That people change. That marriage isn't about grand gestures, but the quiet loyalty underneath. But her silence didn't feel loyal. It felt calculated. She started keeping her phone face down. Always. Even at dinner. And not just face down, locked behind a new 6-digit code. She never used a code before. When I asked why, she said something about needing digital boundaries. She smiled when she said it. That same too-white smile that stretched across her lips without ever bothering her eyes. She used to grin from the gut, wide and messy, the kind that tugged her whole face into joy. Now her expressions were rehearsed, controlled, like a politician learning the language of empathy without ever believing it. She became busy, all the time, not a hectic kind of busy, just unavailable. Evenings were booked for webinars and journaling sessions in her locked office. Her weekends belonged to solo hikes and spiritual resets she insisted were essential. Once, she canceled a family dinner to declutter her emotional space. I watched her from the living room as she cleaned out a drawer of old notebooks, moving them from one place to another like the process itself was performance. I offered to help. She told me I wouldn't understand. She was probably right. There was a moment, tiny, cruel, when I watched her put on lipstick before one of her solo walks. Lipstick? For the woods? I asked, casually. Planning to seduce a bear? She laughed, but it was too fast, too sharp. She said it made her feel empowered. Said women should do things for themselves, not for men. I agreed, even as I watched her check her reflection twice before stepping outside. Then the music changed. She started listening to things she used to mock. Soft R&B tracks. Slow, sensual stuff she once called sex music for sad people. I caught a chorus humming through the bathroom door one morning while she showered. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at the closed wood, listening to lyrics about secrets and late nights and needing to feel something real. Her silhouette moved behind the steamed glass. She didn't know I was there, and I didn't knock. I just walked away. The house got quieter, but the quiet grew louder. Everything she didn't say began to scream. She stopped asking how my day was. Stopped teasing me about my ugly socks or making me coffee just the way I liked. Our routines were still intact. Dinner, dishes, bedtime. But something vital had been carved out of them. Her laugh was delayed, like she had to remember when to react. Her touch, when it came, felt like an afterthought. A checkbox ticked. She started smelling different. Not bad, just not hers. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. I tried to believe her new habits were signs of growth, not distance. But belief requires participation. And she'd left me behind. Then came the night that almost broke it. She said she was going to the studio late to finish some project. She's not a liar. At least, not obviously. But something in the way she tossed her gym bag over her shoulder felt unfinished. Like she'd forgotten which role she was supposed to be playing. She kissed me on the cheek and said, "Don't wait up." I waited anyway. I opened the laptop, not hers, mine. But the shared browser history hadn't been cleared. She must have used it earlier. Nothing shocking at first. A few YouTube yoga videos. Some wellness articles. Then a restaurant. One we'd never been to. A reservation confirmation page. Table for 2. Tuesday, 7 p.m. That was 2 days ago. I hovered the mouse over the screen. Stared at the date. Clicked once. The page reloaded. It was booked under her name. No notes. No guest name. Just the booking, sitting there like a corpse in the middle of our shared data. I closed the laptop slowly. My reflection stared back at me in the black screen. Eyes wide. Mouth shut. I didn't ask her about it. I didn't storm off or demand answers. That would have made it real, and I wasn't ready. Not yet. The next morning, she hummed while packing the kids' lunches. She dropped in a note like she used to, drew a smiley face in the corner. I watched her hands move, steady, smooth. Like everything was fine. Like nothing was broken. Then she turned, smiled at me across the kitchen. That same smile. The one that never reached her eyes. And I smiled back. Because now I wasn't trying to believe anymore. I was just watching. The kids were working on their school presentation in the living room. Some project about honesty and character. And she'd volunteered to help them research examples of ethical leadership. I'd suggested real-life cases, quietly watching her from the kitchen as she nodded and smiled like she was still part of this family, still capable of teaching something she no longer lived. The irony clung to the air like static. I didn't say anything. I just waited. She reached for the family tablet. The one we kept for the kids' homework, YouTube cartoons, reading apps. She tapped through screens without hesitation, probably assuming it was still the same toy tool it always had been. She didn't know I'd synced it to my account last week. She didn't know I'd enabled full backup to the cloud, or that I'd replaced the password and stored every scrap of usage. I'd done it methodically, like prepping a net before a fall. She tapped the browser and started searching public stories about whistleblowers. Then, without thinking, she minimized the tab and pulled up another, clearly not meant for the kids. It loaded instantly. No password needed. A messaging app. Her thread was still open. I couldn't see the screen from where I stood, but I didn't need to. I watched the back of her neck as she stiffened. Just a fraction. Just long enough to feel it, panic, maybe, or guilt. She tapped quickly, minimized it, swiped to the home screen like nothing had happened. I could have left it there. I could have continued pretending. But when she got up to check on laundry and left the tablet on the cushion, I walked in, sat down, and picked it up. She wasn't in the hallway yet. She never saw me do it. And the screen was still on. No password screen. No chance to lie. The thread was open. A message, unread, sitting at the bottom. Tell your son not to bring up steak next time. I thought we agreed on Wednesdays. I stared at it for exactly 4 seconds. Just enough to read it once. Just enough to feel the floor shift. I knew who it was. Not by name, but by pattern. That was the day I'd gone to get steaks for the kids. The day I left the house for 40 minutes. The towel. The second glass. The faint trace of hotel soap. The kids had asked for steak. They'd spoken loud enough. She must have laughed it off, lied her way through it, promised him Wednesdays were safe. But children are unpredictable. They don't know how to be discreet. And now he was texting her reminders like they were covering shifts at a job. Tell your son. Your son. Not our son. He wasn't even pretending anymore. He'd been in my house. On my furniture. Around my children. Watching their routines like a wolf watching livestock. And she let him. Encouraged it. Scheduled it. That's what struck me. Not the betrayal. Not even the physicality of it. But the planning. The deliberate weaving of her new life into mine. Like we were nothing more than camouflage. I locked the screen and placed the tablet back on the cushion exactly how I found it. I didn't speak. She returned from the laundry room humming softly, asked if the kids needed help resizing an image. I smiled and said I'd taken care of it. She smiled back. That false, polished grin. She had no idea I'd seen it. No idea the war had started. I didn't feel anything in that moment. No rage. No heartbreak. Just clarity. The kind that strips emotion from the bones. She thought she was in control. Thought she was clever enough to juggle timelines, to balance 2 lives on a single schedule. But she'd made one fatal error. She'd exposed herself through my children. She let them become variables in her equation. And that's where she lost. Because I would never let them pay for her disease. That night, after she went to bed early claiming a migraine, I sat downstairs and started planning. I backed up the tablet to a hard drive. I sorted timestamps. I created folders named by week. I labeled everything with brutal precision. I drafted emails, saved files, uploaded copies to the cloud. Then I cleared the browsing history and returned the tablet to its normal state. The next morning, I made pancakes. I told the kids they could invite a couple friends over this weekend. She looked surprised but said nothing. She kissed my cheek again, warm and distracted, like she still believed I hadn't noticed the crack in the mirror. But I wasn't looking at her reflection anymore. I was looking through it. Through the wall of smiles and half-truths and cheerful declarations of self-discovery. She thought I was still on the outside of the truth. But I was already on the inside. Watching. Waiting. And preparing to make sure the next person who discovered who she really was would be the people who mattered most. It was supposed to be a normal Sunday lunch, at least. That's what she thought. She was wearing that beige blouse she always picked when she wanted to look put together, smiling too wide as she set the plates down, asking the kids if they remembered to feed the dog, pretending she was still the woman who held this family together. The kids were sitting at the table, talking about their school project, the one on ethics, and she leaned in, proud, asking what examples they had chosen. Our daughter, without hesitation, said, "We were gonna do whistleblowers, but Dad said real-life examples are better." She grinned, looking to her mother. "He said to use someone we know." I didn't look at her. I just passed the salad, my expression flat. That was the first flicker in her eyes, small, cautious. Her fingers paused mid-reach. I saw it. The slow burn of recognition, the realization that I wasn't playing dumb anymore. "Isn't that interesting?" I said, voice calm. Turns out, honesty's not as common as we thought. Especially not under this roof. Her eyes shot to mine. "Excuse me," she said, too sharp, too fast. "What's that supposed to mean?" Her tone had a tremor now, the first sign of fear. I gestured to the kids. "You know," I said softly, "it's amazing what you find on a shared device. Even when it's wiped clean. Sometimes it sinks anyway. Sometimes it remembers everything." She froze. The fork slipped from her hand and hit the plate with a small clatter. The kids looked up. She laughed, forced, shrill. "What are you even talking about?" she asked, trying to sound confused. "You're making no sense." I leaned back. "Tell your son not to mention steak next time," I said, quoting the message. Her face drained of color. She blinked. "What?" Her mouth opened, closed, then set into a smirk. "Okay. So you saw a message. It's not what you think." I smiled without warmth. "Really? What exactly do I think, then? That he's your life coach? That he's giving dietary advice for the kids he's not supposed to know exist?" Her smirk faltered. "You're twisting this," she said, voice rising, the performance beginning. "You've been paranoid for months. Making up stories. Snooping around like some obsessed little man." I tilted my head. "No, I didn't snoop. You left the door wide open. You walked him into this house, scheduled him into our lives, and thought no one would notice. You didn't hide it because you thought I was too safe to fight back." She stood up, waving her hands, trying to control the narrative. "This is toxic, okay? You're trying to humiliate me in front of the kids." "No," I said sharply. "You did that. When you lied. When you smiled at them with the sweat still on your skin. When you coached them to call it a growth phase, while you tore our home apart for your cheap little thrill." Her eyes flicked to the kids, confused, staring, silent. Her lip trembled. "I made mistakes, yes. But you were never emotionally present. You checked out long before I did anything. I was lonely." I nodded slowly. "So you filled the void by dragging a stranger into our living room. By letting him know their names, their routines, their schedule. By letting him pretend to belong while I went out to buy the steak they asked for." Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't fall. "Not yet. You don't understand what it's like to feel invisible. You've always been so passive. Predictable. I needed something real." My voice dropped to a whisper, razor sharp. "No, you didn't need something real. You needed an excuse. You wanted chaos, but not the consequences. You wanted to play mother, wife, and mistress all at once and thought the world would applaud your bravery." She sat back down slowly, eyes darting, trying to recover. "We can still talk about this. Not here. Not like this. Please." The begging had begun. "This isn't who we are." I looked at our son. He looked at her, then at me, silent. I turned back to her. "You want to talk? Let's talk. Explain to them why the man you brought here gave you advice on hiding steak night. Explain why you changed your schedule on Wednesdays and forgot our anniversary. Explain why they found those texts on the tablet and had to ask me if you were in danger, because that's what they thought. That some strange man was harassing you. Until I had to tell them the truth. That it wasn't danger. It was desire." Her face broke then. The tears came, not quiet, not noble. Ugly, panicked, full of noise. "Stop. Please, stop. They don't need to hear this." "But they already did," I said coldly. "They already know. And they're still here. Watching. Just like I did. For months." Her sobs filled the silence. I didn't move. I didn't shout. I just watched. That was the final blow. Not fury. Not vengeance. Just the stillness of a man who no longer cared what she had to say. The kids stood up quietly, one by one, and left the room without a word. The house stayed quiet. She was the only one making noise now. And it didn't sound like power. It sounded like collapse. She followed me down the hallway with bare feet and shaking hands, her voice high, strained, trying to pull authority from the wreckage she created. "You're overreacting," she said first, sharp and desperate, like if she said it quickly enough, it would reverse the damage. "You're taking this too far. It was a mistake, a stupid, meaningless mistake. People work through worse. We can work through this." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Her footsteps quickened, until she was walking beside me, trying to read my face like she used to read a grocery list, searching for something she could control. "You're not so perfect, okay?" she snapped, switching gears, pulling claws from a dying script. "You think you've been some saint? You've been cold for years. You live in your head. You don't even talk to me unless I start the conversation." I opened the hall closet, pulled out a folded blanket, and carried it to the couch without acknowledging the accusation. She followed, pacing, her arms crossed like she was shielding herself from her own reflection. You'll never find someone who loves you like I did, she spat, voice trembling. You think they'll line up for a man who's this vindictive? This emotionally dead? I turned and looked at her then, not with anger, not even with contempt, just with surgical stillness. You didn't love me, I said quietly. You loved the safety I gave you. The predictability. The man who wouldn't question why you locked your phone, or why you needed space on the nights he came over. You loved knowing I'd still come home. Her mouth opened to protest, but I cut her off before the noise could start. And I wasn't cold. I was exhausted. I gave you everything, and you gave me absence in return. You called it growth. But you weren't growing. You were escaping. From us. From the boring, reliable man you outgrew the moment someone else made you feel new again. She stepped back, blinking fast, arms tightening around her chest like she was shrinking. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. It wasn't about the kids. It wasn't even about you. I nodded slowly. Exactly. That's the point. It was always about you. You decided what you needed was more important than who you were hurting. You taught our children how to lie through their teeth while smiling. You made them part of your secret, even if they didn't know it. Her face twisted in pain, but she wasn't done. She couldn't be. Don't do this, she whispered. Please. Don't do this in front of them. I glanced toward the hallway where they'd disappeared, where their quiet footsteps still echoed like ghosts in the walls. They already saw, I said. And they're smart. Smarter than you gave them credit for. They'll grow up knowing what love is supposed to look like. And it's not this. She sank onto the edge of the couch like a doll with snapped strings, her hands clasped between her knees. I didn't think you'd ever stop loving me, she said, voice cracking. I thought you'd always stay. I stared at her. No pity. Just clarity. That's because you never saw me as a person. You saw me as a constant. Something guaranteed. A man so loyal he wouldn't notice you were already gone. Her eyes welled again, but no tears came this time. Just glassy silence. The last of her armor slipping. We can fix this, she said, barely audible. I'll do anything. I'll cut him off. I'll go to therapy. We can start over. I looked down at the blanket in my hands, then back at her. You already did, I said. You started over while I was still here. You just didn't take me with you. She opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. And that's when I stopped speaking. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain myself again. I just sat down on the couch, unrolled the blanket, and turned on the lamp beside me like it was any other night. She sat there, frozen, waiting for something, for anger, for begging, for chaos. But I gave her silence. The kind that hums in your ears when you've been left behind. The kind that says, you are no longer part of this story. She stayed a while longer, whispering half-formed apologies into the air. But I didn't answer. And in the quiet, her power slipped through her fingers, falling piece by piece to the floor she used to walk on like a queen. She showed up at my office on a Tuesday, hair limp, makeup smudged like she'd tried to put herself together in a rearview mirror, hands twisting some tissue that looked like it had been soaked and dried 5 times over. My assistant asked if I wanted her escorted out. I said no. I wasn't angry. I was curious. She waited quietly in the reception area, I scanning the floor like a student waiting to be expelled. When I finally stepped into the room, she stood too fast, almost losing her balance. I just wanted to talk, she said, her voice raw. I just wanted to see you. I nodded once and motioned to the hallway. I didn't take her to my office. I took her to the lobby, where the lights were too bright and privacy was a myth. She talked while looking everywhere but at me. Said she'd lost her position at the wellness center after too many clients requested a different coach. Said her affair partner ghosted her after his wife took the kids and moved 3 states away. Said her friends started unfollowing her for the sake of their marriages. Even her sister stopped answering her calls. They think I'm a monster, she whispered. Like I killed someone. She looked up then, eyes rimmed in red. I didn't kill anyone. Her voice cracked. I just made a mistake. I studied her like a stranger. And that's exactly what she looked like, someone I used to pass in the halls of another life. You didn't kill anyone, I said flatly. But you didn't flinch when you used your own children as camouflage. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. Over and over again. Her mouth opened, but nothing came. No defense. No charm. Just silence. She tried again, softer this time. I still love you. I mean that. Even now. You were the only one who saw me. The real me. I shook my head slowly. No. I saw the version of you wanted me to see. The polished version. The family-friendly illusion. The woman who smiled while her second life was breathing down our necks. You buried the real you a long time ago. And honestly, I never met her. Her lip quivered. We were soulmates, she whispered. We built a life. I glanced out the window. No, I built a life. You visited it between lies. She looked like she'd been slapped, but I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was simply done lying for her sake. Her hands trembled as she stepped closer, tissue clenched so tight it tore in her grip. Please, she said, barely audible. Please, just talk to me. We can start over. I don't care where or how. Just, I need something. And that was it. The truth spilled out, not for love, not for healing, but because she had nothing else. No image. No identity. No mask to wear. The people who once called her radiant now crossed streets to avoid her. The ones who applauded her growth now called her poison. She'd been reduced to a cautionary tale, whispers at PDA meetings, blocked on group chats, muttered about in grocery aisles. And now, she was crawling back to the only man who ever made her feel safe. But safety has a price. And she'd spin hers. You don't need me, I said quietly. You need someone to pretend you're still worth saving. But I'm not your savior. I'm the man who survived you. She broke then, right there, in the lobby, hands covering her mouth as sobs escaped in choked waves. People glanced over. I didn't flinch. I didn't offer comfort. She'd already exhausted that currency. When she finally looked up, eyes swollen and pleading, I just nodded toward the door. Take care of yourself, I said. No hate. No love. Just closure. She walked out into the afternoon sun, a ghost in daylight, and I never saw her again. Sometimes the kids ask what happened to her. I tell them the truth. She's out there, somewhere, learning what it means to lose everything you once pretended to value. And maybe, if she's lucky, she'll one day learn how to be real. But not with us. Never again with us. Thanks for listening. Let me know where you're watching from, and what you would have done if it were your wife.